If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you have one of the greatest tools for leading into conversations that can lead to the gospel, and that's your story. Something's happened to you. I mean, you may not completely understand it, and you may not be able to explain it all theologically, but it's very, very real, and no one can say it's wrong because it happened to you. Something like this happened in John chapter 9 in the New Testament. Jesus meets a man who was blind. He spits in the ground and makes some clay, puts it in the guy's eyes, tells him to go wash in a pool, and the guy receives his sight. Now, when the religious people or the religious leaders hear about this, they confront the guy. They want to know who healed you. He says his name is Jesus. Well, tell us about Jesus and explain what he did. And he explains it and explains it. And then they said to the guy, well, do you think he might be the Messiah? And they said, well, I don't know. Maybe he healed me. And then they respond, he can't be the Messiah because he healed on the Sabbath. So he is a sinner. And then this guy says this in John chapter 9 and verse 25. Just visualize this. He then answered, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. I was blind, now I see. I don't know everything. They asked him some more questions. And finally, they got so angry at him, they kicked him out. Something had happened to him. He couldn't explain it, but the reality of it confounded the wise. Everyone loves stories. I mean, so much of television and so much of magazines is all about telling people stories. Standing in a grocery line, what do you see there? Magazines with stories. They may not always be true, but they know that people are really interested in learning other people's stories. Think of sales. Sales are just stories of satisfied customers. Oh, I was feeling so terrible and I had no energy at all. Then a friend told me about da 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 da, and Shazam, now I took it and I feel so great. I can run and play all day. You have a story about your journey of finding and experiencing Jesus, but there's a good chance you've never organized it so you can actually tell it. So that's what we want to do here is help you organize your story and put it into three different categories or use three different steps so you can help it make sense and have some flow so you can communicate it to the people that you're with. For starters, there was a was. You have the way you were before you met Jesus. There was no doubt some kind of a void, some kind of an emptiness, a hole that needed filling, that left you wanting, that left you searching. Maybe it was a fear of some type, maybe a fear of death or a fear of being alone. Maybe you dealt with tremendous guilt. Maybe you had a great insecurity, felt unloved. And these things gnawed at you and they created unrest and they created anxiety. And there's no doubt you tried some things and did some things to try to deaden the pain, to fill this void, to make you feel valued. So go ahead and explain some of these things, not in too much detail, because too much detail can get distracting unless that detail is really key to your story. Just keep in mind, you're not trying to win an Oscar. You're just really trying to help people identify with this hole, with this emptiness. The second thing that you have is a what happened. In the midst of all that was going on, something happened. It could have been a traumatic event that brought you to your senses. Maybe something happened to a friend of yours or something in your own family or to yourself. It could have been something that you saw or something that you heard that just started you thinking. Maybe a friend talked to you over coffee, like we talk about here, Therefore Project, all the time. Maybe you decided to begin reading the Bible just to discover what it said, which, by the way, is what happened to me. Maybe somebody invited you to church. Maybe it was a Christmas time or Easter. Anyway, something brought you in contact with the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you made a choice to follow Jesus. Now, no doubt it was a process. So talk about that. Just tell people the process, the questioning, the wondering, the thinking, and then talk about how you crossed that line of faith and you said, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus. And then there is the is. Following Jesus has changed the was. It met a need. It filled an emptiness. I mean, talk about some of the things you talked about in the was, whether it was guilt or insecurity or fear, and how coming into a relationship with Christ changed that or filled that. By the way, it didn't make it perfect. It's not like you no longer have any problems, because that isn't true. But knowing Jesus has given you the power to change. That blind man, he couldn't see. Now he could see. Maybe he was still unemployed. Everything wasn't perfect, but something changed in his life. You've experienced a very real relationship with God, and it's changed you, and it's still changing you. Now, some of you may have grown up in church and you've always heard about Jesus, so you think, man, I don't really have much of a story. I became a Christian when I was 8 years old. I understand that because, in many ways, that's my own story. But there's a good chance that there was a time when it really took hold, when something happened. It became real. And I would encourage you to use that as your story. For me, I'd say something like, I grew up in church and I heard all this stuff and I believed in Jesus. But when I went to college, man, I began to have some questions and I had this huge insecurity about myself. I mean, I was afraid to talk in front of anybody. I would get low grades in classes because I just was scared to death to hear myself talk, to hear my own voice. Then in my early 20s, I can't tell you exactly why, but I decided, I really ought to start reading the Bible to see if what I believe is really true. And as I did, I began to understand dot, 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 and it goes on. That's what I use as my story. And it, because there were some traumatic things that were going on in my thinking and in my life during those years that'll make sense to a lot of people. You have a story and it's powerful, but there's a good chance you've never organized it. So organize it using these three categories. Take out a piece of paper or just start writing on the computer and put down a paragraph on each of these, on the was. Think about what your life was like and give some examples. What happened? What were the events that led to you coming into a relationship with Jesus? And the is, what's happened since? And it's progressive because it's still happening. Spend time working through this and putting it together because I got to tell you, I've probably used my own story to lead into a presentation of the gospel more than anything else. So I'm going to say it again. Organize it, organize it, organize it. Next session, we're going to take a look at how you can use it.